Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We're going to look at some of those stories in more detail, but first, a quick glimpse of some of the headlines on front pages. England expects, says the Sunday Telegraph, nothing to do with Brexit, just the rugby, but they've also got that interview. May told, "Don't let Hammond ruin Brexit," by Bernard Jenkins, who's one of the leading lights of the Brexiteer camp in the Conservative Party. Then there's the Sunday Times. They've got a doping scandal hitting the Winter Olympics. But they also claim that 3 Brexiteers, Michael Gove, Mr Rees Mogg and Mr Johnson, are all plotting to get rid of Theresa May. Not a lot of detail there, but they're certainly somebody's certainly making menacing noises. More to talk about there as well. And then, from the other side of the argument, as it were, the Observer, in its new tabloid form, has the civil service in the shape of Sir Andrew Turnbull hitting back against those people, saying it's all reminiscent of the stab-in-the-back myth in 1930s Germany, and Uma Thurman on almost every single front page, as you'd expect, having heard the news. Janine, let's start with you and that front page in the Sunday Times, that splash.
Well, you know, it's with some dread we look again at a challenge by Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg. The Sunday Times have illustrated this with a fantastic picture of them all wearing musketeer hats, I assume to try and cheer us up a bit as
yes, the 3 musketeers
walk us through this again. It's not hugely detailed story.
Athos, Porthos and William Rees-Mogg. That's right.
There's a couple of sort of gory quotes about the cavalry are coming and that we're ready for a contest and there will be a war. It feels obviously like a tactical move.
There's very few details here, and we must have a certain amount of scepticism about it. But when they say, or people briefing on their behalf say, but we have the numbers in the Tory party for our wing of the argument, they're right, aren't they?
Yeah.
Mira?
Well, I mean, I think this story looks a bit like fake news to me. I mean, it's based on quotes from MPs not named, and you know, I'm fairly well acquainted with the goings-on in Westminster. It doesn't really ring true. It just points to a sense of division.
Plot?
No, I mean, certainly not this plot. I mean, this feels very unlikely. It makes for a very good newspaper headline if you want to sell newspapers, because both, you know, Boris and Jacob Rees-Mogg are kind of box office.
They certainly are,
in that sense. I think that, I mean, it clearly points to a sense of division within the Conservative Party. But I think, you know, to Theresa May's credit, she was a Remainer. She has committed to leaving the EU. And I think she is trying very hard to manage the fact that the parliamentary majority is against Brexit, and the popular view is to go for it. So that's the tension.
You worked very closely with Boris for a long time. He's basically a blushing violet. He's not interested in promoting himself, is he, in the papers? Is that the general view?
Well, I don't think he's involved in this plot, no.
Okay.
I think I can say that with honesty.
OK, but Janine, this is there is a real choice for Theresa May to make now, isn't it, about the customs union, about exactly which way she's going. I joked about her option being like a unicorn, kind of rustling ahead somewhere in the forest. You can't quite see it. We're told it's there. We haven't seen it. We're beginning to believe it's not there. We don't. But quite soon she has to come down off the fence and say she's going to be sticking very closely to the EU after we leave, or she's not going to be sticking closely to the EU at all. And that is a genuine choice for the country.
What we're seeing today is an awful lot of jostling via the front pages around what people think she should be on that question. I would just say, it's not going to be fake news, this story. You know, Tim Shipman, who's written it, is a very good and very well-sourced journalist. He's not made it up. When people say fake news, I often think...
He's not made up a fact, but he has suggested that this is a warning from some Tory MPs. That's not quite the same as a conspiracy by these 3 individuals, and I think we just have to be careful to be honest about it.
No, it's
true, though, that there are people who are very disappointed with her and want to move the debate on. But I do think that, you know, we've been saying that for the past 6 months. This can't possibly last, and then she somehow hangs on.
Munir, I mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg a moment ago. We've all been watching him engage in that scuffle at Bristol University, but the Mail on Sunday has got a big double-page interview with him. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a remarkable scene that was shot on video of Jacob Rees-Mogg speaking at a university.
He's been very cool about it, hasn't he? He's been saying, I'm not really bothered, it was overdone, you know.
Yeah, I mean, he's handled it fairly well, actually, because he's not overplayed the sense of being a victim at all, and he sort of shrugged it off. I thought, actually, at the event, you know, these people arrive wearing masks, clearly wanting to cause trouble, and he sort of goes up to them and starts talking to them and reasoning with them. And so I think it's quite a good look for him. Actually, I think there is a bigger issue about aggression on university campuses and students feeling entitled to close down debate, which I find very worrying. And I think his way of dealing with it is probably the right
But
one.
his message on Brexit is pretty clear and
yeah, he's cast doubt on the Treasury forecast report that was leaked this week, and he and a number of other Tory MPs have said that the civil service is not acting impartially. And there's another story in the Observer of that.
the civil servants getting involved.
Yeah.
Janine, can I just ask you a little bit about Rees Mogg as well, because you're our social media person here today. You understand all of this. The video of this tussle, very short, rather hard to see what was going on, has been shared all over Twitter and all over Facebook, really for about 12 hours now, constantly. It's done Rees Mogg, presumably, quite a lot of good.
Well, and there are, as ever with these things, several perspectives on the video. You can find different versions of it, and different media outlets will promote different versions, as with everything. He comes out of it just fine. I think obviously this happened and he came out of it just fine. What he did not come that well out of was casting doubt over the document last week and just, repeatedly lying. He didn't like what the document said. He didn't like that there was no good scenario. He didn't like the advice, so he just lied about the way it came. And I feel quite strongly that this war on the civil service has become an ideological position where actually you have to trust the people who have gone and done the work. They produce the facts. If you don't like them, that's really troubling, but that is what it said.
Munira, this is Sir Andrew Turnbull is the main person quoted here, who was head of the civil service back in the day, very experienced and very rarely outspoken. He mostly keeps his mouth shut, so it's interesting that he's done this.
Well, he and another former head of the civil service, or certainly formerly involved in the civil service, Robin Butler.
Oh, he was head of the civil service.
Yeah.
Again, very eminent.
Suggesting that these attacks on the civil service are reminiscent of 1930s Germany, which I think is really overblown. I think the thing to remember in all of this is, despite the indignation that the civil service might be accused of not being impartial, is that clearly somebody in the civil service did leak this document with a view to influencing policy. And that suggests that there is a view.
Yes.
Janine, you're shaking your head. You're obviously involved crucially in the story.
That you know exactly where the source came from. But
well, I presume that something that was meant to be kept confidential until it was complete.
It
wasn't left on a photocopier, was it?
Presuming is quite
difficult. Unless it was stolen by one of your journalists, I don't know.
No. OK, let's go to your tablet now, Janine, because you've chosen another story about Facebook and the future of British elections and so on.
Right, so that's gone upside down.
It's upside down. Your tablet's no better than my tablet. I'm
actually
relieved
your
to hear
tablet,
that.
Andrew, and I believe
it is my tablet.
So
well, there you go.
Your fault.
There you go.
So this is a story that we published last night on BuzzFeed about the Facebook news feed. And it really does play to this whole thing about whose facts and whether a fact is biased or whether the fact that you don't like the fact is the bias. And Facebook's news feed, you'll remember recently they said they're going to change the algorithm to produce less inflammatory news stories and more pictures of your lovely cousins.
They can just twist the maths so it's slightly less inflaming. That's in itself a bit weird, isn't it?
So this has caused absolute ructions in the media because everybody's panicking about the dilution of traffic, because instead of our lovely news stories, it'll be your pictures of your baby cousin. And finally, the politicians have cottoned on to the fact that this isn't just a journalism problem, this is a politics problem. It's particularly a problem for the people who are worrying about the next election, which I know we all hope and trust is a good 3 years away, but just in case it turns out to be November.
But to be absolutely clear about this, if somebody in Facebook decides we're getting too many stories about social housing, they can change the algorithm to ensure that far fewer of them appear towards the top of our screens.
Well, I'm sure if Facebook were here, they would say...
That's an extreme example. But
they would say they would not take a subject or a bias or anything like that to change it, just away. But because of the great success of highly targeted direct campaigning during the last election,
yes,
and for the Labour Party, the Tories have been putting a lot of effort into upgrading their digital marketing. And as Jim points out in this story, our political editor, they may be changing their campaigning for the last election.
They're a bit behind the curve, aren't they, in all of this stuff? Yeah.
Campaigning for the last election. OK. Finally, Munira, can I talk about the momentum story in the Sunday Times? We're going to be talking to Claire Coburn in a moment, but before we do, Sunday Times has done a big operation on momentum.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. I'll lose it now. Here we go. I think this is very interesting. It's a Labour council where the leader has now walked away because she said that she was essentially being targeted by Momentum activists. And I think it's very interesting that this week it's presented by a number of commentators as a kind of working-class takeover of Labour. And actually, I think it's the opposite. I mean, Claire Coburn herself has said that the kinds of people who were attacking her were white-haired men in million-pound houses.
We should say very clearly that the Momentum deny doing all of this stuff. It has become a kind of favoured media story now, the wickedness of Momentum all over the country.
Yeah, and you have to be honest about what's really happening. But I do think there is a bigger shift, certainly in the Labour Party, the changes in the NEC, the way in which people who've been formally banned from Labour have been allowed back in. And I think this goes to the heart of an issue of where the working class are in the Labour Party. It seems to be more and more removed from that working class vote.
We're almost out of time.
Just on that, Aditra Chakraborty wrote in The Guardian this week, it's one person's high politics. It's also, people who live in Haringey, for residents, it is a housing problem in their area and it's their regeneration issue.
A theme we will pick up in just a moment. Thanks both you very much indeed.
Time now, of course, to take a look at what's leading the Sunday papers today. Let's start with The Observer. It leads with a warning from the former head of the civil service, who says that attacks on the service over its handling of Brexit are worthy of 1930s Germany. Brexit also on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. The Conservative backbencher Bernard Jenkins telling the Prime Minister not to let Chancellor Philip Hammond ruin Brexit. The Sunday Times claims that Theresa May will face a coup if she tries to keep Britain in a customs union with the EU, with Tory MPs plotting to put Boris Johnson in number 10, with Jacob Rees-Mogg as Chancellor. The widow of a man who served with Prince Harry says her husband may not have killed himself if he'd received more help from the Ministry of Defence. That, according to the front of the Mail on Sunday. And the Sunday Express has accused Jeremy Corbyn of not taking diesel car pollution seriously by keeping his car waiting for 40 minutes. Well, joining me to discuss all that, Jonathan Liss, Deputy Director of think tank British Influence, CEO of D-Drill, Julie White, and the Sun's Westminster correspondent, Harry Cole. Lovely to see you all this Sunday morning, and thanks for wrapping up warmly. Let's dive on in, shall we? Jonathan, you've picked the story on the front of the Times, the three Brexiteers, the dream team at number 10.
That's right. This is a story about Brexiteers planning to install a dream team at number 10 if the Prime Minister decides to stay in the Customs Union. These Brexiteers are actually planning a dream world. I don't know why it's so difficult to read the joint agreement from December, which states that we must have full regulatory alignment with those rules of the Customs Union which support the all-island Irish economy and the Good Friday Agreement. These people are not thinking about how to keep the Irish border open, which requires the customs union and, in fact, the single market. Why aren't they actually addressing solutions instead of just dismissing the idea of a customs union and imposing their own red lines? The Irish people are tired of being ignored, patronised and dismissed in that way. And, of course, as Don Rubb was talking earlier about trade deals, Theresa May was literally in China last week talking and agreeing trade deals. We can sign those deals while we're in the EU and the customs union. And if the benefits, the costs of leaving the customs union far outweigh the benefits of these new trade deals.
I mean, as you were just saying there, according to Liam Fox and a few others.
Yeah, I mean, we would be unable as a nation to reduce tariffs or set our own tariffs on other things if we stick by these rules. Obviously, Europe is a very large neighbourly trading partner. There's going to be some form of agreement about whether we stick to sort of the whole point of the customs union is making things easy. No one wants to stick up to trade barriers, neither Europe nor us. So it is all part of subject to negotiation. I think the most chilling part of this story for number 10 will be the words "the cavalry is coming," and I tend to find when you read source quotes like that from anonymous ministers, just say it in the voice of which one you might think it would be. And who would speak in language such as "the cavalry is coming"? This is a pop shot. The cabinet core committee are this week going to spend 4 hours around the table and try and hammer this out, work out exactly what they want from the transition, what they want from the end state, what they're going to do about the customs union. So this is almost a sort of pre-game warning shot, sort of a scene setting from the Brexiteers that they know they've got Mrs May in an incredibly vulnerable position and they're holding the cards.
I mean, it is no nonsense, though, isn't it, Julie? When you have ministers like Dominic Raab saying that the government is speaking with one voice on this. There is one camp that is saying we want to continue pretty close alignment. The other saying absolute clean break. Anything less than that would be an abrogation of our responsibility to the electorate. Until they come up with an answer. Yeah. I mean, how does the UK negotiate with the European Union?
For business, we hate uncertainty. We just hate it. So we need an agreement, and we need agreement sooner than later, because how can we carry on employing, trading, if we don't know the rules to the actual to the game? So we need it sooner than later.
And I suppose another interesting thing from the story is that Ollie Robbins, the senior civil servant, is talking about services deals. Trade deals are more than just tariffs. And the point is that the common external tariff is the customs union, and it's also a customs union. That's what we have to be in.
Julie, you've gone inside the Sunday Telegraph.
Yeah, so I think I'm just here to keep the Brexiteers away from me. So.
Thank God for you, Julie. Housing planning guidance is too timid. Who'd have thought that?
They're now, the ministers are saying it's a cop-out, because really it's just a change to the permitted development. So that means that people can extend the houses or build upwards. So this is not helping anybody in affordable housing, because we know that the problem is that the actual planning organisation in this country is just it's useless. I mean, they say it themselves in here. It's slow, it's expensive, and it's conflict-ridden, because they just don't know, even when the policies agree with the planning, that it's a lot of conflict, a lot of people's personal choices, and really stops a lot of brown sites being built. But again, I feel it is a bit of a cop-out, because we need affordable housing in this country, not to extend upwards so that, make a three-bedroom out to a six-bedroom or three. We need affordable housing.
Affordable housing and social housing.
Yes,
and this government cannot get away with saying, look, we're trying. They've been in power for...
The problem for the government is that they've set the housing as the promise is revolution, they're going to fix it, they're going to make it a defining issue for the government. The Tory party spent the last 20 years at local level opposing every single housing development in every nice shire around the country. And you've got this sort of tension in between the sort of housing ministry and the PM, who knows, you can see, not least at the last election, that people need houses. And finding a balance between that and what they're saying in their own backyards, which is, oh, no, we couldn't possibly spoil.
I mean, it's aiming at the cities as well. I mean, so you're just doing it through the cities,
I mean, at times like this, I mean, Labour's plan for thinking of nationalised house building scheme doesn't look that silly. It doesn't look that daft. Actually looks like the type of bold thinking you'd expect, perhaps, from the government.
I think, like tuition fees, housing is going to be one of those issues that the Labour Party can really do well on, because we can see there's a housing crisis. In London, we see all around us these skyscrapers that are basically used to park oligarchs' money, while people can't get on the housing ladder, and people who are working in London, they can't afford to live there. That's got to give, and it's a political issue, if nothing else, because people are not going to vote for a government that is keeping them out of housing.
It's just not easing the pressure on the housing.
No, not at all. Harry, your story from The Observer, their front page. Attacks on the civil service reminiscent of pre-war Nazi Germany.
Yeah. There's been
I know a little bit of my history. Yeah. I'm struggling to see the link.
There's been an extraordinary Whitehall war of words, which, has blown up this week, starting out with a leaked document that showed that civil servants had been modelling different options for Brexit, and it all looked pretty gloomy and pretty doom-laden. The one option they didn't model is what is actually government policy. So basically, this is again another scene setter to this custom union battle that's happening now. Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker and various Brexiteers have for the first time said what they've been saying privately for a year, which is that the civil service haven't really got over the referendum result, and they're doing everything they can to possibly soften our terms of exit.
So is there any legitimacy to what they're saying? Because some people have been saying to me on social media this morning there is a reason that the OBR was set up.
Well, that's exactly. The OBR was set up to depoliticise statistics that come out of the Treasury. Look, the Treasury, it is a vast organisation, extremely powerful. Now, getting to The Observer, so there have been some mild criticism, to say the least, of the civil service. But in a reaction that, would make you stand up and think, hang on, are they onto something here? They've wheeled out Andrew Turnbull, who's a former head of the civil service under Blair, to accuse them of basically anyone that disagrees with the civil service is basically acting like Nazis, which is just so unhelpful. And there'll be more moderate civil servants who are doing their absolute utmost to make Brexit a success, who will have their heads in their hands today, going, this is the last thing they need. It's all very well to paint the Brexiteers as Gus O'Donnell, another head of the civil service, who's also mysteriously been wheeled out today, to call them crazy. This is just completely unhelpful, and if you wanted to pour fuel on the criticism of the civil service, this is exactly the way to do it.
I mean, how I see it is Brexiteers. I do hate that word. It's just a process of intimidation, really.
Well, you know, how you can blame them when really they were up against the entire might of the British establishment in 2016, who used every trick in the book, £9 billion of taxpayers' money, to trash the
British establishment is right.
Well, I mean, this is...
Well, 17.4 million people disagreed with them.
This is an argument I'm not going to get into.
We will never get out of here.
What I would say is that it is totally outrageous to impugn the civil service in this way. And, you know, the Brexiteers accusing the civil service of derailing Brexit. The Brexiteers are derailing Brexit by trying to deliver something that is undeliverable. That's the fundamental point here. We can't get around it.
I almost had a Sunday review of the papers without a fight over Brexit. Unfortunately not. Jonathan, Julie, Harry, lovely to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much.
And now this week's programme is brought to you by the numbers 8, 5 and 2. That's how much smaller the economy will be in percentage terms, or so she was told, on every version of a trade deal with the EU likely to be made available to us, according to the government's own economists. But don't fret, she said, on a trip to China. The one trade deal her economists haven't modelled is the one she's going to negotiate. But when she asks Theresa May for details of that trade deal, Mrs May tells Angela Merkel, make me an offer. Allegra, Screeny, do you actually know what the Prime Minister wants?
I haven't got a clue, Robert, but there is a glimmer of hope. We find out at the end of this week. She has 2 crunch cabinet meetings to decide Brexit. The papers this morning suggest those meetings will be pretty grim because the sides are still poles apart. Here we have an attack by a civil servant attacking Leavers for attacking civil servants. Yup, pretty incendiary language, not going to calm things down. Over here, the front page of the Sunday Times, a bumper crop of a story. Here we have the idea that Brexiteers are plotting to install a dream team at number 10. This is if Team May softens Brexit, Gove, Johnson and Rees Mogg will mount a coup. Now, the journalist Tim Shipman knows more than Theresa May does about the cabinet, but even so, it would be pretty weird because Gove and Johnson, well, they're still not really mates. Remember this, the Times' Matt Shorley has helpfully dug out for us this beautiful Peter Brooks cartoon summing up the last Tory leadership campaign. But there is something in this idea of Brexiteers finally taking over the government. Have a look at this. This is the runners and riders of Tory, according to Conservative Home. They regularly poll members of who they want to be the next leader. As you can see, Jacob Rees-Mogg getting a fifth of Tory members' support. Michael Gove is second, Boris Johnson third. But down here, there's a heck of a lot of other runners and riders. The race is wide open. So this morning, we have been running our own Twitter poll, and this is how you lot out there want who you want to be next. Now, Rees Mogg is out in front on 44%. Amber Rudd is second. Now, interestingly, earlier in the day, she was actually in the lead. Robert.
Now, I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative John Whittingdale and Labour's Stella Creasy. John, if I might turn to you first. Are you a member of Mogmentum? Are you a great Jacob Rees-Mogg fan?
Well, Jacob and I sit on the exiting the European Union Select Committee together, and Jacob is an extremely good parliamentarian. He's a great colleague to have. He's very...
Future leader?
Well, Jacob said that he doesn't want to be leader, and actually I think Jacob's strength is to be the irritant, to ask the difficult questions, which he's very good at.
Now, you've got your finger on the pulse. Is Tim Shipman of the Sunday Times right that there is this plot by the 3 Brexiteers, led by Johnson and Gove, to topple her? What do you reckon?
Tim is an extremely experienced journalist and quite often gets the exclusives, but I have to say I read this one with disbelief. I don't think there is going to be a leadership election. I don't think it's in the interests of the party to have a leadership election right now. And this sort of rather curious...
Said that after she's negotiated whatever she negotiates in terms of Brexit, that would be the moment to get a new leader. You've been very clear on that.
Well, what I've said is that we have an overriding imperative for the next 8 months, which is to try and get as good a deal as we can, and to distract from that with what could be a 2-month leadership contest would be very damaging. Now, you know, the future of a Prime Minister is, to some extent, going to be tied up with what happens in the Brexit negotiations. But at the moment, I think it's absolutely right that we should give her all the support we can in getting that good deal.
But it becomes an issue as soon as you've got whatever deal you get.
Well, let's wait and see what we get.
OK. Stella, in your party, there was a bit of a crisis this week when Claire Cober, very senior councillor, leader of Haringey Council, quit. And she quit partly because she says that sexism and anti-Semitism are endemic in Labour.
Yeah. Look, Claire is somebody who's given 10 years of her life to fighting for her local community. And whatever your concerns are about the specifics of one particular policy, recognising that and respecting that is vital. And so when she says, look, I'm seeing misogyny, I'm seeing anti-Semitism, and I know myself that is happening within the Labour movement, we have an issue. We are a party of equality. We hold ourselves to a higher standard. So when and if that is happening, the party needs to take it very seriously and it needs to act.
And just to be clear, you don't think that the party takes sexism and anti-Semitism seriously enough?
I think a lot of us have concerns. That
she said she didn't take a complaint to the ruling NEC because she didn't trust them on the issue, for example, of sexism.
I think there is a concern. Look, if members are feeling that they can't take issues forward, then the party ought to take that seriously. I know myself how difficult it is to complain when you are a sustained target for this stuff. I've seen it in my local community. I've seen it nationally. The issue for all of us is, what does the Labour movement stand for? If we're a party for equality, we must brook no misogyny, no anti-Semitism in our party. And I'm hearing it. I was at the Limud Festival over Christmas, and I'm hearing it from Jewish members, how frightened they feel. I'm hearing it from women in the party. I myself have experienced it. It's time for the party to act.
Well, I'll be talking about some of this with Shami Chakrabarti, who, as you know, has campaigned both against sexism and led that anti-Semitism review. So we'll be talking to her later in the programme.
So the Prime Minister may have been out of the country to drum up trade, but even from 5,000 miles away, it must have been hard to ignore the continuing unrest from some inside our party and the repeated calls to be clearer about Brexit.
Theresa May was in China this week, where she gave President Xi Jinping DVDs of Blue Planet as a reminder of the dangers of plastic pollution. Back home, Conservative MPs gave her some advice on how to lead the party and the government. Some advice was offered to cabinet ministers getting restless on Brexit.
The best way they can support her is to take a vow of silence on this subject.
But most was for the Prime Minister herself. Some even aired their thoughts in public.
I do think the window is closing, because politics can be quite a brutal game.
When is the government going to stand up against the hard Brexiteers who mainly inhabit these benches?
She does not actually have a majority for her policy in her cabinet.
It was advice of a different kind that hit the government when BuzzFeed published leaked civil service analysis suggesting that under various off-the-shelf trading models, the UK would be less well off in 15 years than if we'd stayed in the EU. But Brexit Minister Steve Baker wasn't worried about the forecasts.
I think that they are always wrong, and wrong for good reasons.
The analysis was grist to the mill for Brexit critics, but Theresa May probably didn't expect one minister to pile in. The Justice Department's Philip Lee said the leaked report couldn't just be dismissed, and that if anywhere near correct, it raised a serious question about current Brexit policy. But that's thinking 15 years ahead. One former Brexit minister, George Bridges, took aim at the government in the House of Lords for still not knowing what it wanted.
All we hear day after day are conflicting, confusing voices.
Theresa May returned from China saying she had secured £9 billion of business deals during the trip. Local media dubbed her Auntie May, while International Trade Secretary Liam Fox said her middle name is Resilience, claiming foreign leaders were well aware of Theresa May's strength.
You look at the Prime Minister in a different way than some of, let's say, the internal tea room discussions in the UK do.
While at home, there was speculation about her ability to lead. Auntie May herself was clear.
I'm not a quitter.
She'll be relieved the only resignation she was offered this week was from a minister who'd shown up late to Parliament.
I'm thoroughly ashamed at not being in my place, and therefore I shall be offering my resignation to the Prime Minister.
But with open warfare in her party, calls to step up her game and a crucial cabinet meeting on Brexit within days, Theresa May knows she needs to do something special to ensure the next departure isn't hers.
So there's plenty to talk about with my panel of political insiders. It feels like Theresa May's worst week since possibly last week, because we began the show last week talking about how difficult it was for her at the top of the party, the leadership and the fights within it. Is it even worse now, Steve?
It's about the same. And what is interesting, if I could just in 10 seconds put this in some context, I'm working on a project looking at prime ministers at the moment, and it is amazing how many prime ministers spend most of their time worrying about being deposed and how rarely it happens. Just to give 2 examples in 10 seconds. From 1968, Harold Wilson was in trouble, and he survived another 8 years. I'm not predicting the same. Major from September 92, when we fell out of the RM. He survived until the 97 election. This is a constant theme in British politics, but prime ministers are rarely deposed. That's not a prediction, but at the moment, I work on the assumption that she will be around for some time to come.
It's highly distracting, though, presumably, Julia. It can't help getting on with the business of government or Brexit, for that matter.
Well, we hear constantly, don't we, that prime ministers always end up having to deal with events, dear boys, events. But actually, all of Theresa May's woes are of her own making. It's her total inability to show a backbone, show some spine, and actually have a Brexit policy and stick with it. I find it absolutely extraordinary that we're going to have 2 meetings of, the cabinet, they're calling it the Brexit War Cabinet, on Wednesday and Thursday this week to decide what our Brexit policy is. She's been in office for a long time. It's a long time since the last election. She's still there. I would have expected this to be done. It's a total travesty of leadership that's going on. All of her problems are of her own making. She could be dealing with the warring factions in her party and indeed dealing with the opposition and all those other threats just by being a stronger Prime Minister, and, for instance, making it clear to the likes of Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, one more false move from you, she should have said 6 months ago, a year ago, you're out. And he should have been out a long time ago if she had the will and the strength to do so.
But, Tom, is it not by being ambiguous about her position in Brexit that she's been able to remain as leader of the Conservative Party? She can't come down clearly on one side or the other, because that then poses a huge risk.
Completely. So, which is why I both disagree with both Julia and Steve, because there is a third way in all of this, you see.
Third way. Right.
I believe all her problems aren't of her own making. Brexit was not of her own making. She is somehow, not saying that's a problem, but she somehow has to try and get this through a parliament where she has no majority, where she has a cabinet split, where she has her backbenches deeply split. That is a huge problem. And the only reason she's still there is because she hasn't made a big decision. She hasn't got off the fence on one side of the argument or the other, and she's trying somehow to keep the ship together and compromise. Now, as George Bridges said in that brilliant speech in the House of Lords this week, to govern is to choose. I think it was originally Tony Blair who said that. This is the year of choice. In fact, the next 6 months are going to be the 6 months of choices for Theresa May. She's also got to get those choices on Brexit, market control, sovereignty, access, these huge, great big decisions. She's got to get those choices past 4 different hurdles. One being the cabinet. She's got to somehow get the cabinet all on board. The next being her own MPs, trying to somehow stay alive and stay in charge, having made a decision, all that sort of stuff. Then, of course, she's got to persuade the EU to buy what it is she's trying to sell. Then, of course, she's got to get that through a House of Commons with no majority. I find it very, very hard indeed to think she's going to get over all 4 hurdles by the end of the year. Therefore, I'm afraid I can't see her as leading the Tory party by the end of it.
Julia?
I genuinely think it would be risky for anyone to make any predictions after the last few years. Can I say that 2018? Can I point out 2018 isn't the year of choice. 2016 was the year of choice. I don't care what the EU wants. I don't care what the Cabinet wants, what MP wants. What I care about is what the British electorate wants. The British electorate made their choice in 2016. There is a mandate after the last election. Yes, Theresa May didn't increase her majority. She lost a load of it. 85% of people voted for 2 major parties and the UK and DUP and all these other parties supporting Brexit. There is a mandate for this. There is no more choice to be made. She needs to get on and do the will of the British people.
Just very briefly, I completely agree with Tom about these hurdles, and they are almost impossible to get over. But that would apply to any Prime Minister. So you have to ask the question, what does it solve? Now, in the longer term, changing a leader might give them more electoral success, who knows? But it doesn't solve getting over those hurdles. you could have Boris Johnson saying, oh, Britain can rule the waves. Those hurdles will still be there.
But a Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who knew more about what he or she wanted.
We'll come back to this later in the programme. Our expert panel are still with us in the studio to talk through some of the week's events and what we can expect coming up in the near future. Now, one of the things to make the news this week was a scuffle at a university in Bristol where Jacob Rees Mogg was interrupted by some protesters. And before we talk about it, let's have a quick look. Jacob Rees Mogg, who always seems to be at the centre of any story these days. Steve, are those unusual scenes at a university political meeting, or is that happening around the country and not being caught on camera and therefore we don't know about it?
Well, no, it's not that unusual, and it happens at times when politics is heated. It always has done. There's nothing exceptional about the highly charged atmosphere of politics at the moment, and students have often done this. You know, controversial speakers through the years go to university and get a hard time like that. By the way, Rees Mogg, for his many epic faults, is brilliant at dealing with people like that. I've seen him at meetings where people have come in and heckled. He's fantastic.
And very polite and very courteous always.
That's the way of doing it. But no, it is. I think it's an absolute myth that something is happening. There's a lot going on in politics at the moment that is disturbing. But people doing this is not justifiable. It's always happened. And no different.
It didn't happen when I was at university in the late 80s, early 90s. Absolutely. The idea that someone would come to speak at the union or at any debate and that someone didn't like their views and you would put on a balaclava and go and shout fascist scum at them and think that that was an acceptable part of political debate, that absolutely did not happen. That did not happen. And I'll tell you what also didn't happen. What didn't happen was it wasn't condoned by the Shadow Chancellor. Be fair, he has not condoned this behaviour. No, he hasn't. No, he says he condones all violence. Apart from the fact that the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, not Jeremy Corbyn, to be fair, John McDonnell has repeatedly talked about laughter on stage, encouraged laughter from his audiences, talking about violent, insurrection against politicians. He has said he thinks that no Tory MP should be able to speak publicly without having this sort of behaviour. This is being condoned by a mainstream party, effectively deputy leader.
Now, you said John McDonnell condones all violence. I think you meant to say condemns all violence, but in favour of direct action.
And he says that, but he hasn't specifically condemned this. And unless correct me if I'm wrong, he has not specifically condemned this. Angela Rayner, Shadow Education, has.
Brandon Lewis also was trying to say, well, these are elements of the hard left and trying, well, maybe to make this a little bit of a party political topic, but there's no evidence that any of these people are actually associated with the Labour Party or with Momentum.
Yes, there is.
Well,
supporters of.
There is a little bit of evidence in that a lot of these infiltrators are members of Momentum. Momentum is incredibly closely linked to Jeremy Corbyn. John Lansman, who runs Momentum, is now on the NEC. It's now, official Labour Party campaign group. I think Brandon Lewis is going to jump all over this to try and claim huge political capital in a little bit of a naughty way, perhaps, because Labour frontbenchers simply aren't encouraging their members to storm university meetings. But I think that there is a wider truth going on, which is politics is basically getting more ideological. The centre ground is weak. It has a very poor voice. The louder voices are on the hard left and the hard right. That's yet another reason why the centre ground really has to find a way of speaking up and speaking more.
There's only one party conference where your political security guards. Of course, not armed guards, security guards. There's only one, and that's the Labour Party conference.
When Brandon Lewis was here earlier, and he was saying the government wants to introduce legislation to stop intimidation in politics, it's arguable that the Public Order Act probably allows for that at the moment anyway. I mean, nobody wants to see people putting themselves forward in public life being intimidated, but is this an attempt to make a little bit of political capital out of this situation as well, do you think?
Yeah. It is. And it has always gone on. I remember Keith Joseph, a real sort of innocent right-winger in the Thatcher era, going to universities and getting absolutely worse treatment than this. Not justifying the treatment, by the way. It has always gone on amongst students. There is anger at that kind of age, and it manifests itself in these stupid ways. But it has always gone on. Yeah, he is trying to make political capital, and the link with Momentum is not at all clear. Momentum is a complex organisation that people are struggling in the media to make sense of because it's different in different places and its influence is different in different places. And so, yeah, he is trying to make political capital out of things that have always gone on in politics.
Okay.